Hey guys, it's that 3 Slasher Steve, and I'm going to be going over a little bit of the lighting and the caustics and all the little training samples for the scene that I'm putting together. This is my little Skyrim knockoff map, and one of the things I'm working on is the CPU rendering with the training samples on, and I've got my training samples just set to 128. So one of those things you could note is that if you put this at 128 like it is, then every sample you take after that, it will take into account those different lighting, like caustics, reflections, everything else. It'll calculate those individually after the training samples. So you're not really going to get a whole lot more out of it than the 256 right now until they put this to the GPU rendering, because it's just CPU at the moment. And you see the light calculations that are coming through here, and the light that's kind of coming through the trees and hitting the surface is really nice. It's picking up some very realistic shadows. It's actually taking the color in this reflection and running it underneath a very normal sun reflection, because I just have a sky texture in here, very basic. But before this got too far along on the 4K for the next tiles, I just want to like see the progression and see how this thing's going. And there's some more lighting on this side. I can't wait for that to pop up. Like I said, I'm only doing 200 samples. This CPU rendering, it's like there's a lot of other things to do. But I mean, seriously, I've just been doing this for a year. And that's it. I mean, I just picked up Blender in December of last year, and I have not stopped just soaking up Blender. It's amazing where they're going, and having just been around a year ago, I can see the progression. So I just want to kind of like share what's going on, set the samples to 200, and I'm going to kind of come back after the render is done, and we'll take a look at it, and then we'll kind of mess around and look at some of the caustics. I got a little particle bridge in here, like a little stylized particle bridge, and some other things. But I'll come right back after the render. Alright, so the render is just about done, but before I get into that, I want to go over the lighting. So this scene is being lit, and if I go to the world properties with just a basic sky texture, and then whatever settings I have. Now, if you come down to the settings tab and surface, you'll see shadow caustics. So you'll need to enable that if you want the caustics in your scene to work properly. Now, that would be the same if I came in here and just dropped in any basic light, like a point light. And then I go to the light properties and enable shadow caustics. And then I can enable multiple importance as well, and that's going to reduce some of the light noise. So I'll delete that out of the scene because I don't want it. Now, what's going to cast and receive, right? So my ocean plane, if I go to object properties and I come down to shading, and come down to caustics, you'll see that you can cast shadow caustics with this. Now, this is going to be a refractive material that is going to cast the shadow of this object, taking into account the light per se, the point light or world lighting, and it's going to calculate that and then calculate the surface and then cast those onto the receivers, right? So what do you have as a receiver? So I go to object properties, like my shoreline here is a receiver. This rock is a receiver. The monkey head can also be a receiver. It's currently not, but it can be. And then my bridge is a receiver. And so some of those items that you want to have the reception, and this should actually be receiving shadow caustics, so I'll have to re-render that, and I plan on doing about 3 or 4 more renders. And so the receiver objects are going to receive an approximated shadow of the caustic caster, you know, up to 10 bounces currently. So I'm not trying to like add this to everything in the scene. Maybe these two rocks, the deck, and then my Suzanne, and this is kind of pushing it, even having all these in here. But definitely the caster is going to be the actual ocean itself, so just kind of keep that thing in mind. And then whatever the surface looks like, and I'm gonna go over here and take a look at this thing, and whatever your surface looks like, it'll start casting those type of caustics on those other objects. And so I've got some different things kind of submerged, like my little pieces of ice here. So the entire scene is kind of dedicated to the break of winter and the onset of spring, and it's inspired by a Skyrim map that I saw. And of course I got to complete it, but this is just a little example so you can see the caustics, and once it's done, it's almost at 200. Once it's done, we'll come back and look it over. Now there are a few things to note as I kind of like pan around in my scene here. The caustics generally, and per the documentation, only work with smooth normals. It seems to work pretty good on the water surface. Obviously a glass container, or the example given with like the diamond shapes that some of the tutorial creators are doing, then you get some fantastic and very, very amazing looking caustics. So you're literally just going to get the shadow of maybe the ripples on the surface at the bottom, and get some reflections off of the rocks and things like that. And another thing to note is that generally only the reflective caustics within the shadow of whatever objects that you have as the caster are going to technically be rendered. Those, like the other things, are going to, generally speaking, be ignored. And I'm actually pretty excited to see how this area turns up when it's all said and done. And it looks like it just finished. Alright, okay, so I got a lot of the little microwave crest reflections. That's what all that was. So not too amazing, but I do like it. It got some pretty accurate light shadows with the CPU rendering and the path guiding, because that's the big thing that I've been kind of like working on. I do like how you can see some of the depth in the water. You can see what's underneath the water to a pretty strong degree, and then a little bit of the caustics are actually present. Now just jumping back into my scene, it's not done rendering yet. It's going super slow with the CPU. I cannot wait till they put this with GPU compute, man. That is gonna be something else. But you can see the caustics underneath my water and right next to my dock. This is right next to the dock. I literally just went straight down into the water. You can see the other formations and different things I've got under here. And then you can see the shadow caustics working really well down under here. So you could do an underwater shot with this, and I think it would turn out really nice. So overall, that's pretty cool. And now I can do what I wanted to do, which was start this scene from underwater. I'm trying to figure out a way to like make some bubbles. I think I could do that with the volume cube, perhaps, and like play around with that. And now that I think about it, we could actually go in and kind of mess around with the volume cube itself. So what I want to do is actually go over to my my launcher here, and I'll pull up my 3.5. Oops, that's the download. That's too fun. Okay, so go back to the daily. Here we go, 3.5, and I'll pull that up. And what we'll do is we'll just like drop in. I want to create some caustics with a volume cube. I think that's just going to be fun. Alright, so we won't take too much time on this, but I'm just going to jump directly into a geometry node editor. And what we can do is just grab the cube, click new, and we'll pull all of this up. Alright, 3.5 alpha is just doing insane stuff. I had to close that one and go to my 3.3.2 since I've got like every version of Blender pretty much. So just cube, geometry nodes. You can delete the group input and then just go in and we'll just type in volume cube. Nice and fun, and just tag that in. So now we have a volume cube. And I'm going to make sure that I'm on a solid view for the rendering. And well, what I'd like to do now, and we'll just get just enough of that in there, we can see what's going on, is we can mess around with the fields here. And what we can do is pull off the density factor, which is a diamond fields. And we can type in Musgrave factor and get this kind of funky view right here. And kind of mess around with this. And you could switch this to 4D if you want. Kind of like create some extra noise in there. And you can kind of play around with the scale and do whatever you wish. Alright, so this is incredibly boring. So what we'll do is we'll take this and duplicate it. Make a little room. Type in mix and the Shift A mix RGB because this reads vectors. We'll take the height from both of these and plug it in till we get different values. I will stick this one at a little less, maybe something like that, and bring this one a little bit higher and just change them. The luminarity is going to be a big one to change. So you'll see we have this kind of like two-tone pattern going on. So then come over past the volume cube and put volume to mesh and drop that in, and then drop in a set shade smooth. And we're going to want to put a material on this, so go ahead and put a set material. And we'll put a set material node because it's not going to recognize it otherwise. Now that shade smooth, remember we need smooth normals to make the caustics work. It's going to look pretty good. And if you note that with this mix RGB in here, you've got a factor you can kind of change. So if you like one setting a little bit more, you can change it here. I'll put that back to 0.5. And now from here, you can actually change everything. So the whole thing is completely modifiable. Let's see, probably get a little better result right here. Yeah, so you can change this up, and the reason we're doing this is so you can have this nice little animated factor right here to change the caustics as you go, and you can make a really cool effect. So put in hashtag frame and then / like 1000 and hit enter. And I've got this little timeline right here, so I can literally just hit play and this is going to start changing for us, right? But I'll pause it for now because this is exciting. We can have a little bit of fun with this. Now we got to create a material. So let's come over to the material tab and just going to zap that off there, make sure I've got it selected, click new. Drop down the Principled BSDF, come down, get a mix shader, and we can start off like this and just put on a glass. And it's real important, just know that the caustics right now are ignoring a glossy. This has nothing to do with glossy, so if you're trying to get those nice little the glossy node in there, it's not going to help you out. Not right now. Then for the second shader, obviously I want a transparent, not a translucent. And I don't know why that is always on top. That's super annoying. Let's see, I'll go to like 0.9 for now, and everybody likes to set theirs at 0.133. The Blender manual suggests 0.8 for glass. It's funny. And then another spot it does suggest 1.3, but whatever. So we'll go in and let's drop in a plane, right? And it doesn't look like it's coming in the right spot, so just Shift A, cursor world origin, and then Shift S, excuse me, selected cursor. Now I can just bring this down, scale it up, jump into edit mode, go to edge select. I'm going to grab those two edges and extrude them on the Z. Then I'll hit A for all, Control B bevel, roll it up a good little bit, jump back out. I'll shade that, excuse me, I will shade that smooth. And now I've got a little bit of a background. So this is going to be our shadow caster. So we come over to the object, drop down the shading, and we want to cast shadow caustics with this. This can be a receiving of the cast, excuse me. This will receive the shadow caustics. And now we want to get a light. So let's grab a light and we'll just Shift A, drop in a point light because we like those. And I'll just kind of bring this over just a little bit. Now if you've got the beam builder, let's go ahead and check and see if we've got that in the preferences. Should be under extras, extra objects. So it looks like I've got that enabled. So I'm going to make sure my cursor is back to world origin, and I'm going to Shift A, go to mesh, and it should be under extras down here. So pull up a beam for the beam builder, and I'll just hit Alt G for that and bring it back to the center, and then Alt R if you had a rotation on it. I'll hit Alt G on that, bring it back. I'm gonna grab the cube, hide it, grab the background and hide it. Now I've got the light inside of here. So I'm gonna hit 1 on the numpad, and I will scale this down a good little bit, scale it on the Z, and now we have a beam, a real beam builder. So what I want to actually do here is we can parent this thing, and we can add a couple of constraints to make all of this work. Number 1, I'm going to make this the light the child of the parent, which would be the beam builder. So I'll grab the light, come to the constraints, click child of, and make the target the beam. So if we kind of like zoom in a little bit here, you can see the lights in the middle. If I just grab the beam, you can see the light is going to go with it. Obviously, you've got the little light halo on the outside. Now we can hit Alt H and bring everything back. And I'm actually going to grab the cube and the plane, and I'm going to hit M, make a new collection. I'll just call this Caustics 1 and hit enter so I can separate these. And now under this main collection, which I'll just call render, it's going to be my light, my point light and everything. And make sure you've got a camera in the scene, and I will hit Shift A and I will bring in a camera. And the camera can be in the render section as well. And I've also got a couple of lights on the side here that have nodes attached to them to create noise patterns and different colors. And we'll test. Alright, so I'll just hide the cube for a second. I'll hit G and X, GY, maybe GZ. Just kind of bring that back up. Hit Alt H and bring it all back. Now for this, I want to add a track 2 constraint for this one. So we can add a track 2, make the target the cube. And you're going to have to make an adjustment or two and kind of like figure out which way it's going to go. So Y and Z, target Z. I believe that's going to actually work out pretty good. Now it's got our light constrained, technically, pun intended, with a light. And so now we have some options here in geo nodes, which we can actually pull out and put in our geometry nodes modifier tab right here. So come back down here and type in group, and we will grab a group input. And you can just drop that group input, and what we'll do is we're going to pull out the animated W factor. I'll pull out the scale for both of these and the lucarnarity. You try saying that 5 times fast. Lucarnarity for both of them. So I've just got access to all these outside of the geometry nodes workspace. Kind of cleans things up and gives us a little bit better setup. So now if I take this and hit G, you can see it's going to move around everywhere. So let's jump into cycles. And now I can jump over. I'll be on GPU compute for this one, and I want to like change the settings a little bit. I'll go to scene light, scene world, and I'm going to turn my world properties down. All right, guys, I swear this thing said loading render kernels. May take a few moments for the first time. It literally took a few moments and crashed. And it's my first time using the 3.3.2. The 3.3.1 seems to be working fine, but then oh, whatever. It's just a little glitchy. All right, so I want to grab this light right here. We're going to kind of play around with all of this in the scene. And I'm going to need to increase this a little bit as far as the light. Now, you see, I don't have all this excessive light. Like if I was to put in another point light and turn it up and then move it around, then you've got all this extra light being added in all these different places. But just delete that. So now I've kind of got this beam going directly in to what's going to be caustics. So what I'll do is I'll grab the light, I'll enable shadow caustics. Then I want to make sure that these objects still are, because I saved this right before it crashed, so just have to kind of be sure. All right, everything looks good. but it's not showing the material. So I have to come back over here. I'll just type in glass or something like that. Then I do need to go back to geometry nodes one time, come back here and select glass, and now I can minimize all of that and come back out and start looking at the results. Now I really like this idea with the setup here, but it's really not powerful enough right there, so we could turn this thing up and see if we can get it to work a little bit better. Now I've got some caustics for sure, but it's kind of pumping the scene full of light, and that's part and parcel to what I actually wanted to avoid. So I'll just add a texture here, and I'm going to make this completely black. Now I'm going to go back into solid view for just a moment. I'll hit /, and I want to close the back area up. So I'll just jump into edit mode with this. I'll go to edge select. I'm going to select the back edge and hit F to fill that, jump back out, / back in, go back into render. I'm going to hit Control S because this has been a crazy day and I don't want everything to get all messed up. Now immediately I can notice that this is way too thick, so let's do something else with this and then we'll come back to this. So what I actually do is make sure the cursor is set in the middle, and I'm going to drop in a point light into the middle. And now let's take a look at this. And I'll come over and I'll enable shadow caustics for this, and then kind of like turn it up a little bit. And maybe give it just a little bit of color. Now I'm also going to add a material to my background and then just turn it down a little bit. And what I can actually do is make this a little less rough of a surface and bring up the metallic just a little bit. Alright, so that's kind of rendering out. That looks pretty good. So I could bring this light source up to like some ridiculous strength, and it's really just not getting through the mesh. I put it to 35,000, so what I could do is grab the cube and go over here, and what I'll do is I will kind of change the settings a little bit and open this up just a touch more. And what I actually do is I'm going to jump out to solid mode, and I'm going to go ahead and put a build modifier on this. And I can have a little bit more fun with the caustics this way. So if you haven't used a build modifier before, it effectively has a start and end frame. You can reverse it, you can randomize it, which is pretty cool. So if you randomize, you get something like this. And this is kind of like what I was after. It's like the better version of the decimate, if you will, because I have all of that extra control right here in the slider for the actual keyframes. So now let's jump back over, since we've kind of broken this up a little bit, and see what we've got. Alright, so all I did here was duplicate the light 3 times, and you can start to see the effect. The caustics is going to use the object that's casting the caustics to create a shadow. The receiver is going to receive the shadow version up to 10 bounces, and up to actual 6 objects can be selected. And I'm going to jump back over to the world properties. I'm going to come down to the settings here and enable the shadow caustics. I did not have that enabled, but generally speaking that's just for the world lighting, but I'd like to enable it just as a good measure. Now caustics is one of those things that Blender is actively working on, so I would familiarize myself with it if I were you and get kind of used to it. Now I've got a couple of other things I can do, like I can let's hide all that. I want to delete these lights, and then I've got some different lights in the scene here that I have enabled with nodes. So if I come down to the shader editor, you can see I put a little bit of a node group here with a Musgrave texture and a color ramp, and of course the emission, which is the light itself. And so if I hit Alt H and bring all that back, and I'll bring this, and I can bring the cursor back, and then I will take the selected to cursor. Oops, I'm gonna leave that in. I'm not editing that out. That's just too much. All right, there we go. So G and Z to kind of bring that up. Now let's reposition it. And you can put that light in here too, and I think it would end up looking pretty cool. But this is one of my favorite things to do. If you haven't done this, you can get multiple colors doing it this way. And I'm refracting that light, but it's also being cast with a Musgrave texture. I've got a little value on the scale, so I can change that and have a couple of different patterns. Well, effectively like many thousands of patterns, however you want to do this. And don't forget that the Mix RGB does kind of like work as a vector setup. So once again, you could pull out a noise texture and mix that with a noise texture and come up with, I don't know, endless results. So appreciate everybody watching. I hope you learned something, and we can have a lot of fun with Caustics. I'm going to go ahead and grab this, and what I'll do is come down to the camera, drop down the camera, and bring up the millimeter just a little bit so I've got more of that good stuff in the scene. And I think I'll actually take this view right here and scale up the background and kind of bring this out to maybe like 58. And then I'm going to hit F12 and render that bad boy out. And while I'm waiting for that to load, I can actually Alt-G that and Alt-G that, and then do like I did before. I think I could take the top, bottom view, whichever view works, and kind of get in there and then parent this one. And then I'll add the child parent to this one, and boom. Then I can go up here and grab the beam, and if I bring it out, now I've got this fun little tracking light here, and I'll actually use that for the light instead. And it's look pretty cool once it's all said and done, and I kind of tweak it. And you can kind of play around with the radius of the light to get that to be a little bit more narrow. I'm going to jump over to wireframe, kind of play around with that radius so it's not blowing outside of the mesh, because anywhere that's at, as far as the radius, it's going to cast that light. Alright guys, here is the final result of the noise texture mixed in with the Caustics. Hope this was helpful to you guys. If you have any questions, hit me up in the comments below. And as always, go ahead and hit that subscribe and smash that like button. It helps the channel. And if you feel like it, you can check out some of my sponsors, which would be Philogix PBR Painter Pro and IA Scatter, which is an amazing, powerful geometry node group that will reset origins, scatter, and do animations. So I'll see you guys in the next tutorial lesson.